Do you have your... Hey. Well, oh, thank you. That's probably wise.
So, how's everybody doing after 4 straight sessions this morning? You all right? You ready? Okay. This session is going to be a little bit different than the ones that you've seen before. I'm far less learned than the people who came before. And what I'm trying to do here is as much tell you the story of how I've gotten to where I am. And the research and sort of my position that I'm going to be presenting is really kind of half-baked at this point. It's half-finished. And I'm presenting it to you in that way, partially because I'd like to have your feedback, and also because I find taking that risk to try to present this stuff in public forces me to push a little bit harder. So hopefully you'll come along with me, and you'll be patient with me where things don't entirely make sense, and then hopefully fill in the gaps for me. So first, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about who I am, to give the personal journey a little bit of context. So my name's Dave Cormier. I work at the University of Prince Edward Island. I'm the manager of web communications and innovations, which means I'm vaguely responsible for things to do with the web. And when people have crazy ideas, they normally want me in the room to sort of either make them more crazy or go, oh, that's not going to work. I'm responsible partially for doing creative things, but also partially for giving people the tools that they need to be able to keep their work safe, to be able to keep their students safe, and to be able to understand the context of the web. So I end up with straddling both sides of that. I both do the creative stuff, and I'm also responsible for the communications for the university. As an educator, I've been teaching for, I don't know, let's call it 15 years, depending on how you count. And I came to starting to use the communications technology that influenced my work because I was teaching in South Korea, maybe close to 10 years ago, and I had 270 writing students, and each one of them were handing in 5 assignments a term. And I have the organizational skills of a small mammal. I just sort of take paper and kind of chew it up and throw it in a corner somewhere. And I had giant piles of paper loading up all over the office, and I realized that something had to give. So I ended up using a discussion forum, and I said, okay, we'll log you guys in, and you guys just post your stuff into this discussion forum. And I had no idea what was going to happen. And I had one student who posted 147 times in that discussion forum. And I had students answering each other, and I had students doing my work for me, and I was kind of stepping back going, wow, that's pretty cool, right? And like students were responding and saying, oh, you know, maybe you can do this a little bit better this way. And I had some students who weren't doing that at all, but I knew they weren't doing it. And I was able to go and approach them and go, look, this doesn't seem to be working out for you. So through that process, I started sort of looking a little bit deeper into it. I started talking to other people about it. And in 2005, I started doing some live broadcasting around education technology, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And we ended up with a community of some 5,000 or 6,000 educators who either came together live or listened to the recording and commented later and started learning together. And when you look at 2004, 2005, it was a period of change in terms of the impact of technology on education. And then from there, I started trying to take these ideas and put them into formal courses and put them into the classroom. So I'm going to walk through that process. And what I've come to understand is that what I'm looking for from education is the answer to this question. And I wonder if I just couldn't ask around a little bit here and sort of, how many people here are actually educators? How many people here are familiar with the concept of education and could probably approach this? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so if I ask you just to shout out, okay, maybe I'll ask somebody specifically. We'll ask Grania because she was up last, and then we'll go out to the crowd a little bit. What's the purpose of teaching? Fair enough.
I think it's to impart particular ideas and concepts and knowledge and kind of pass that on to others.
Pass on to others, impart ideas, and okay, somebody else. Okay, go ahead. Help a child integrate into society. That's nice. Yesterday we were talking about normativity in education. That's nice too. All the way in the back. I'm sorry? Clarity. Encouraging clarity. Bringing us from confusion to clarity. Very cool. Anybody else? Maybe a couple more. In the orange, red, back. Development of society through human beings. We're getting some great answers. Yeah, go ahead.
I think learning, because when you teach, you learn more. That's
Just simply learning. Okay. Okay. What's that? Asserting superiority. Thanks, Madan. That's very helpful. Go ahead.
Irresistible urge to share what we figured out the hard way.
Share what we figure out the hard way. Very similar, actually, to Madan's comment in some ways.
Due to teaching only we converted or we became human beings from the early man.
Okay.
We
Okay.
were not educated through the early man.
Very interesting. A civilizing prospect. So I'm gonna try to give you guys essentially my answer to that question, and I'm gonna give it to you in 5 pieces. So these are the 5 things I think about why I teach. And the first one, and Madan started this whole conference off with a picture of kids. So any opportunity I get to put my children on the screen, I always get them up there. That's Oscar on the left. You can see he's lost a tooth. And that's Posey over there on the right. And for me, teaching is about, in some ways, it's about keeping them safe. It's about getting them ready for the world. It's about giving them and sort of helping them avoid some of the mistakes I've made. It's a lot of the little pieces that you guys are talking about. And when we look sort of culturally and deep into our past and even into our present, one of the things that we can all sort of admit that we need to sort of work with and sort of teach people about is fire. You know, the example came up that first day. We had a session. We had an esteemed professor here, and I apologize, I don't remember his name. Can somebody tell me his name? The professor who talked to us about pedagogy that first night on Sunday. Okay, I won't try to repeat. Sorry. So we were talking about fire and talking about the lessons. And you know, there's a famous English expression that says the burnt hand teaches best. Now, I don't know why we're burning our children's hands, but it's an expression. And the expression is sentiment that experience teaches you more than being told, right? So that if you actually go and put your hand on the stove and burn your hand a little bit, you're never going to forget that that stove is hot, right? So, you know, that we should, then the argument is, I guess, and I don't think people are really doing this, but the argument is that we should let our children just get a little closer to the danger, and that way we won't have to tell them 20 times, and they'll actually learn from that experience process, right? The problem is that learning by experience with fire doesn't help you with steam, because they don't look alike, there's no similarity, right? And one lesson learned in one experience doesn't necessarily carry over to another. And that's one of the problems with simply handing pieces of knowledge off to people, is that they don't necessarily pull together all the connections. And what I'm looking for, when I look at my children, what I'm hoping for them to have is the ability to take one lesson and apply it to the next one. Apply it to the uncertain future, right? To be able to learn from that first experience of having the hand on the candle, or preferably not quite in the candle, and then sort of get to the point where they're able to deal with future situations that might hurt them, right? So when we look at it, that what are we trying to learn? What's the purpose of teaching? The hand and the fire, what's the lesson there? Is it just that fire burns? Well, it's a pretty simple lesson, it's still an important one, but it's not one that's going to carry over very far. And that second lesson, to some degree, ends up being what we're talking about, which is, if you did what you're told, you wouldn't have burned your hand. I told you that 10 times. And to some degree, this is the normative lesson, right? This is the one that we're actually teaching in schools, which is do what you're told, right? The third one is the one that I'm interested in. It's the one that prepares you for uncertainty. And that is, there's a hot thing. Hot things exist in the world. It's a possibility that things are going to be hot. I should reach out and check to see close by to see if it's going to be hot and then not touch it because it's going to burn my hand. There's a next level of skill there. There's a next level of understanding and a preparation for the uncertain future. So the first thing I want to say of the 5 things that I think is the best teaching prepares people to deal with uncertainty. That's the higher level. And again, these are the claims that I'm making based on the work that I've been trying to figure out. This is what I'm thinking today. So earlier I talked about EdTech Talk. It's a website. It's a webcast. Like I say, we've done 1,500 live episodes. That's episode 209. It was a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about what the big themes are in education. We had an educator from the Midwest of the United States call us up and say, would you mind doing a webcast with us? We'd like to talk out some of these issues. It was a really good talk. It was nice. About a year, so in 2006, into doing EdTech Talk, we realized that just by getting together and talking to each other, we were learning. You know, I'd be in a meeting somewhere, and it's funny, I was talking to, I think it was Martin earlier, who said, just by reading all these blogs, every time I'm in a conversation, I got the answer that I need. Because I know, it was Clark who was saying that earlier. You know, I have the answer. Why is that? I'm learning this stuff. I mean, Jay would call it informal learning, I suppose. But just by being part of this process, I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to be able to deal with new situations, right? I'm starting to, by being part of this community, right, I'm learning. And this was the point where I went, wow, you know, I don't think I actually care to set content out for people to learn, because these are not scripted conversations. These are just people who care about something to come together to talk about that thing. And then whatever we get to talk about is whatever sort of comes up. And the content doesn't end up being terribly important. We talk about lots of things that are part of the topic. But what that is not important. The connections start getting made anyway. So what I started to say was that the community is actually the curriculum. Right? Being part of the community is the curriculum of what we're doing. So we don't actually have to set up the content ahead of time. We don't actually have to decide what it is. As long as we have a context. And EdTech Talk was a talk about EdTech. The context was set, right? That was enough. And from there, we could learn together just by interacting with the community, just by making new connections with different people, right? So the second thing I think is that community can be the curriculum. And it allows you, and this is one of the critical things about that, is it allows you to learn about stuff that nobody knows the answer about. So in 2005, when we started these conversations, Skype was a year old, YouTube was maybe 2 years old. These things were just starting out. We had no idea what to do with them. And nobody did, because they were new, and we didn't know what they were going to, we had no idea what was going to happen with them. So what are you supposed to do? Buy a textbook? Well, nobody had the answers to those questions at that time. So by getting together, we were able to come up with solutions for how to deal with these things and different kinds of solutions for our own different contexts, just based on being part of that community. And you're going to say, well, yeah, we've been talking about this for 2 days. You're talking about network learning. I understand that. And to some degree that I am, but I'm talking about a specific kind of it. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday. When you guys think of a network, what image pops into your head? Maybe we'll start with George, just to get that out of the way.
Wow, the neocortex and power loss, of course.
Well, we had a little chart here yesterday. We were talking about networks. They kind of look like this. Does that look kind of familiar? Little dots and the lines, and they're all connected together. It's a pattern. And when you guys think of a network, somebody else give me an answer to that question. When you hear the word network, what pops into your head? What kind of words? Go ahead.
Different nodes.
Nodes, yeah. Go ahead.
Non-isolation.
Non-isolation, nice.
Friends.
Friends, okay, good.
Distributed, like me, distributed, okay.
Distributed, yeah, okay. Collaboration.
Switchboard.
Switchboard. Did you plant that? Did you know that was the answer I was looking for? My problem with networks, as they are generally taken up, what do you see as what do you notice in all these? This is a straight up Google search for the word network. This is the least scientific research you've seen in the last 2 days. All I was looking for was a way to try to express when people say the word network, what are they normally talking about? So I just said, well, what's the easiest thing for me to find? The most popular images associated with it. I did a Google search for the word network and threw on images. Somebody did this to us the first day and we didn't come up with a good answer for them, but I'll try it again anyway. What pattern do you see here?
Connection.
Yeah, they're all connections. What else?
Organized.
That's exactly it. They're all super tidy, right? They're organized. Go ahead, George. Okay, if you're going to sit in the front row and go like this, you're going to have to talk.
They're not super organized. I look at that little image off to the left-hand side. That doesn't look horribly organized.
The one down here in the bottom left-hand corner?
The one just up from that.
Okay.
The other one. And I look at the one on top. I mean, there's some, the technical networks, they are well organized, often more hub and spoke. But I look at some of those other ones, and what I'd like to see is not just, I mean, that's a point in time. What if you had that network and you took that same model of whatever it is? Maybe it's biological, maybe it's a sexual relations network, and you did it a month or two later, and it would be a very different system.
So if you took a specific kind of network and talked about that specifically. It's a great idea. I'll do that in the next slide. This picture right here, I actually noticed that because I zoomed in on it. And it turns out it looks very much like this one, except there's more of it. Right? So it has big dots in the middle. They go out to other dots, and they all connect. All the dots and all the lines connect to each other. They're holes that are formed. I completely agree. I completely agree. What I'm saying is that when we talk about network learning, my concern is that often how it's taken up, and I'm not talking about networked research theory, I'm not talking about complexity theory as it's done at research institutes, but as it's generally taken up, it's dots and lines, and all the dots have connections to all the lines, right? So what the metaphor that I've come up with, and Grania almost referred to it in her presentation, and she skipped over the slide. It was the first one she skipped over near the end. It did hurt. It did hurt. So how many people know what a rhizome is? Okay. Oh, there she is in the back. Okay, so what's a rhizome do? Somebody who lifted their hand. You actually, Martin. I remember where you are here.
Plant that sends shoots out underground and then pops up another plant. Strawberry.
There, yeah. So this is an example of a plant that reproduces via rhizomes. It's a quaking aspen, or it is a quaking aspen. That's one plant. They get up to 106 square miles, I think is the biggest one, right? So you're looking at it, you're like, well, that's actually about 100 trees, Dave. Well, it is kind of about 100 trees, and another way it isn't. So underground, it's one plant, or maybe two plants. There's no real way of knowing. You could do a DNA and kind of figure it out, but looking at them, there's no way to tell. See, a rhizome goes down underground, and it shoots out, as Martin describes, and pops up in different locations, right? It takes off, it sort of gets a sense of its ecosystem, and it flows around it's still a network, but it's kind of a messy network, right? It's a very specific kind of network that can respond. It responds to the inputs, it responds to the ecosystem that it's in, and then it heads off in different directions, and then pops up where those things are useful, right? And underground, you get something that looks more like this, right? That, again, this is bamboo. It's all one plant, right? And it's all kind of connected. And anybody who's ever had a rhizome in their garden take off on them knows that they're the nastiest, they're unbelievable. Once they jump in, does anybody know what a Japanese knotweed is? If you did, you'd be cursing right now because you'd have one in your backyard. At the 2012 Olympics site where they were building, I forget which building it was, they found some there. You have to dig down 30 feet and 30 feet around every piece you've seen in order to get rid of it. And that usually does it. Because once the rhizome goes, it can break off and you can have the tiniest piece and throw it in a small little scrap of dirt and it starts to grow again, right? Because you can break it and move it, but it still maintains its process. Like it can still keep moving. So when you look at the rhizome, it has a couple of different things about it that make it kind of a cool kind of network and make it valuable to me as a metaphor for learning. So one of the things about it is that it could start and end at any point, and it can keep going, right? So there's no beginning to the process. There's no end to the process. You start in the middle, and then you start going. Again, metaphor for learning. They grow and spread via experimentation within a context. So when you look at those quaking aspens, they'll start to move, and if there's a rock there, they'll go around it. And if it gets too dry, they'll stop there. In my garden, if I dig the rocks down deep enough, they'll sometimes stop, right? So they respond to the environment and they move accordingly. So there's kind of a, well, they do that. They kind of reach out, figure out what's going on, and then react accordingly. And then again, they grow and spread regardless of breakage. So once you start going, you're constantly building on the same thing. And again, I'm thinking about this as a metaphor for learning. So yesterday, in the session, one of the things that how many people were in my session yesterday? In that session yesterday, we were talking about how learning, or at least I tried to argue, and based on some things that people had said, that learning is not so much a question of progress, or learning how to teach is not so much a question of progress, but of adding, and the constellation that grows out. And in this case, all the pieces that you get and start to grow constantly can regrow themselves and spread out. So that third thing of the 5 things I think, the rhizome is a model for learning and for uncertainty, because that experimentation, that response to the environment, that ability to move and regrow when it's broken are all ways of dealing with uncertainty. So when you look at it inside of a learning sort of environment, and you think about actually teaching this way, okay, the things that I've said so far, well, the content doesn't necessarily need to be there. You need to get together and connect with a community. Well, that's kind of a dramatic thing to be, that's... And then we're saying that, there's no start and end. So it's not a start of the process and you don't move to the end. You sort of move in and react accordingly. And we're starting to get into a pretty informal version of learning. And what normally comes up at this point is, well, I mean, sure, but I don't want my doctors learning that way, right? I want my doctors knowing about, parts of the body and diseases, and I want them to have the facts in their hands, right? Well, the funny thing is that this is actually how doctors learn. Because if you look at the different levels, we look at the different ways that, this is the Cynefin framework. How many people have seen this before? Not very many. Okay, so I'll walk through the framework and explain a little bit what I mean about the different kinds of things a doctor is learning. Okay? So this is a framework put together by Dave Snowden and somebody else whose name I always forget.
Kurtz.
Okay. Cynthia Kurtz. So it argues that there are 4 kinds of decision making. There are simple decisions, complicated decisions, complex, and chaotic situations that allow you that you need to make decisions in. A simple situation is one that can have best practice. So it means there's a single answer, right? If asked, you can set up a strategy where you have a question and you can give it an answer. Okay? Can we think of some examples of that in the medical field? What's a simple best practice that you'll get from a doctor? Every time you ask them this question, every doctor will give you the same answer. Quit smoking. I smoke. Stop. It's a simple one, right? It's a simple question. I have a headache. Here's your aspirin. Go ahead. Take precautions. Lose weight. Exercise. Take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. What's that? Brush your teeth 2 times a day.
Eat apple a day.
Well, you eat an apple a day, and what was the one in the back? De-stress. Oh yeah, reduce stress. Okay, so those are kind of in the simple domain. And if Dave was here, he'd probably criticize the way I'm dividing these, but we're sort of in the range. So you look at complicated. These are situations where calling in an expert will probably give you at least a good answer. Maybe there's not only one answer, but you're going to get a good answer. You're going to get a reasonable response. So what do you guys think is going to... You go to the doctor, you say, my knee is sore. Okay? They look at your knee, they bring in a knee expert, he goes, well, you have 2 choices. You can either get surgery on it, or you can do physiotherapy. But both of them are good practice. And you know, there's something you can do either way. Can you give me another example? That was a tougher one, isn't it? Yeah, go ahead. Exercise. Okay, okay. So the processes by which you'd lose weight. There's not necessarily one of them, maybe some other medical conditions involved, but broadly speaking, there are good practices that you can attend to for that. Now, the complex domain is one where, and again, I should have said, so in the simple domain, it's sense, categorized, response. So the sense in this case is, what's the problem? Oh, I have a headache. Okay, that goes into the place where we can give you simple medication, take this, and then the response is give the medication. So, okay? It's sense, categorized, response. With a complicated domain, sense, analyze, response. So sense, what's the problem? I got the knee, analyze. Well, let's do some looking at that. Let's call in an expert, ask them about it. Oh, okay. One of these three solutions will be the answer. The complex domain is one where there really isn't an answer, right? There's not really something specific that we can do. And unfortunately, for those of you who've been in the medical system, this is pretty common, right? So you get involved, you go into the doctor, and you say, look, my head's been hurting for the last couple of weeks. Well, let's try a little of this. Whoa, that doesn't seem to be working. Okay, so it's probe, sense, response. So you try something, see what happens, and then if it's working, you do more of it. So Dave would say amplify, and if it's not working, you just sort of pull back. So probe, sense, respond. This is the complex domain, right? And then down here, just to finish out the cycle, the chaotic domain is do something, right? I'm bleeding from my neck. Well, I don't know, I'm just going to stop it. You just go in, the first thing you do is do something, and then you go through. So what I'm hoping for my children, what I'm hoping for my classrooms, is that we end up in the complex domain. And for that doctor, when they get to the point where they go onto their internships, that's what they're doing. They're going around with the doctor, they're seeing all these situations, they're slowly starting to acquire, they're slowly starting to see how that stuff happens. They're being brought along. I mean, they do go through the simple domain stuff, they go through the complicated domain stuff, they learn what this is an elbow. You still need to know that stuff, but it's not the goal. And my goal is to be able to prepare people for the complex domain up there. And let's just look at a couple of quotes. This is from 2001, Coping with Complexity. It's an article in the British Journal of British Health Journal, BHJ. Could be that. Nah. Successful health services in the 21st century must aim not merely for change, improvement, and response, but changeability, improvability, and responsiveness. Not so much something you're going to learn in a classroom, right? And something you need to constantly keep working through. And you need to be prepared for that unpredictable future. If you look at management theory, where Dave Snowden's framework comes from, this is actually from a blog post on Dave's website. When you finally come to grips with the fact that you can't solve today's problems using present methods, you take the lead to venture to the complex domain. As a leader, you initiate a search, probe, bring people along, and come up with new solutions that will change the paradigm. So, for instance, in my own work, one of the things I'm responsible for at the university is using social networks to engage with students. Find me the book that tells me how to do that properly. You know, we try a couple of things, we send them out, we sense on the response. If it starts to work, we do more of it. If it doesn't, we do less. And again, that's the probe, sense, response stuff that we're using from here. So we've got it in medicine, we've got it in management theory. So that fourth thing that I think is that rhizomatic learning, the stuff that I'm talking about, the uncertain kind of learning, is in the complex domain. It's for those kinds of problems. It's not necessarily the greatest solution for you to learn your times tables. You know, it's not going to get you to that point, but it'll help you deal with complex problems. Now, the problem with this, and this has been the challenge, and this is how I came to MOOCs. Does everybody know what a MOOC is by now? Can everybody, I know it's a hard way to ask this question, who doesn't understand what a MOOC is? And nobody wants to lift their hand up. I should never ask the question that way. Thanks, George. Yeah, fair enough. I don't either. So for me, And the reason why I was interested in the MOOC when I got the invitation from George and Stephen to come along for the fun was I wanted to do EdTech Talk, you know, when we all got together and had that conversation and had the learning. I wanted to do that, but I wanted to do it on purpose. Creating a community out of nothing is not easy, and usually it doesn't work. And EdTech Talk worked, but I've tried a lot of others that haven't. And we have classes, and we have things we want to learn, and I wanted to be able to say, hey, let's learn about this, but I wanted to do it in that EdTech Talk way. So I wanted to be able to say, from the 10th of March to the 10th of April, I want to learn this, but I want to do it in this kind of rhizomatic way. Right? So how do I do it on purpose? And that's really the challenge, right? Because I want to do it on purpose with this guy. This is Oscar again, starring from earlier. So with my son, I want to be able to do that on purpose. I want to be able to look at him and set up scenarios where he's starting to learn to deal with uncertain situations where there is no answer, and he's just got to try stuff out, come up with solutions, not the right solution, but with a solution that works. So what I did with Oscar, and you can find these on the YouTubes, is we started something called Charlatanosaurus, which is it's a video blog that he does about dinosaurs, which he loves. And everything about putting together a video about dinosaurs is uncertain, right? Because there's 100 ways. There's no right way to do any of it. And we start it without a script, and we try to go through the process. And what I keep finding myself doing is going, so Oscar, how many feet does that dinosaur have? And he says 4. And I go, oh, I did it again. Because it's so much easier to ask for facts than it is to let him go and discover and try and fail and do all those other things. So if you look at the last Charlatanosaurus, and I wrote a blog post about this afterwards, berating myself for doing it, what I ended up doing was saying, what's wrong with that dinosaur? As if there's any value in the whole world for the child to know that a Metriacanthosaurus is supposed to have 5 toes and not 3. There just isn't, really, for a 5-year-old to know this. But what I did is take a really nice, open conversation where he was learning how to deal with all these issues and turn it into something that was back into the simple domain, back into facts, and really facts that couldn't be important to anybody, except for him, because they're really important to him. But again, I'm creating that, right? Bringing it back to the simple stuff. This is a course I teach at the University of Prince Edward Island, Educational Technology and the Adult Learner. This is one of my students from 2 years ago. This course is another attempt at trying to do the same thing, okay? The course always kind of goes the same way. The first day, I have one student who storms out and protests. The second day, I have a riot in the class where the students all gang together and tell me I'm teaching the wrong way. And by the third day, they start to see what I'm trying to do at least. And we start to come together and start to do stuff. Because when the course starts, there's no curriculum. I have a syllabus. I have basic structures of what I'm trying to do. We're all talking about educational technology. It's the name of the course. But we leave the course with a textbook. We don't start with one. So what we end up doing, I have a lot of different kinds of students in this course. And each student is responsible for tracking their own learning journey, for following along and reacting to the ecosystem and coming out with something, right? Now, some challenges to that, as you might imagine, assessment being one of them. But what they do in this course is each student is responsible for mapping out the next 6 months of their learning after the course is over. So to address our friend from earlier, from the 5-Minute University, the entire focus of the course is on what you're going to do when the course is over, and how the things that you've seen that you think are interesting could possibly map onto your future. And that's what I'm actually assessing, partially. And I also assess their engagement with others and how they participate. And I had one of my students the last time I taught this course say, why do you even care about the content at all? Why don't you just grade how hard we work? And I went, that's not a bad idea. So when you bring it up a scale, so we got one kid, we have 25 students, and then we have the MOOC. And Stephen showed this slide earlier in the week. So the MOOC is, depending on how you count, it's 40, it's 100, it's 2,000, right? Depending on what you're talking about. And this was something that we came up with in a discussion, George, myself, a colleague of ours from the UPEI, two colleagues of ours from UPEI, Bonnie Stewart and Sandy McCauley. And through those discussions, we came up with this sort of 5-step process. I may have butchered it a little bit by the time I got it to the screen, George. But orient, declare, network, cluster, and focus. This is how you handle the fact that the curriculum and the path is not set for you. That you actually have to set the path yourself. And that's the key. If it's going to wander and reflect and everybody has their own rhizomatic journey, then how am I going to tell you what to do? I can't. The responsibility for that has to rely on Oscar, it has to be on my students, and it has to be in the participants of the MOOC. So the fifth thing I think is we need to make students responsible for their own learning and for the learning of others. And that last part is a nod to Jay from yesterday when he was talking about the fact that, should we even be talking about learning by ourselves anyway? And I don't think learning happens without people. You could say, oh, I learned from a book, but a person wrote that. At some point, we're connecting together. And that happens to be the way I see the world. But one way or the other, I think that in our class, well, certainly for this to work, the students have to be responsible. And I think a responsible student, a student is responsible for their own learning, as we are with anything else. If you give a kid a toy, and they don't understand its value, and they just take it, often it's going to get broken. If you can make a child or a person responsible for stuff they're doing, they're far more likely to keep it together. So, and 32 minutes, not too bad. So having been here for a couple of days, this is the topic that's always on the top of my brain, because like I said, and I've said this 10, 15 times now, there's just millions going on all over the place. We'll throw a million over there and 10 million. And my favorite, and I know I've said this 10 times now, but the fact that there can be a discrepancy of between 150 million and 500 million in terms of the people who are going to be skilled in the next 9 years, and everybody's just fine with that. 350 million either way, it'll be fine. I don't know. So here's my last pitch. When people look at rhizomatic learning, when they look at MOOCs, when they look at my classroom, when they look at, even with their kids, they say this: we need to measure learning. And I talk particularly when I talk to bureaucrats, and you talk to people in government or policy positions or senior administration positions, they're talking about measurements, right? And that we need to measure learning. We need to measure it. And I say, well, the way you're measuring that kind of breaks the whole learning process. You know that, right? And they go, well, we need to measure it. And this is the incredibly annoying response I always give. The fact that you need a thing, I argue, just don't measure it. I don't think you can anyway. Maybe you can, but I don't know. And I know that when I look at a student, or I look at my son, or I look at whatever, I can tell that learning has happened. My son went to French school, goes to French school. When he started, he knew about 50 words in French, and now he corrects my French. Is there learning there? Of course it is. How much French has he learned? 47% of it? I don't know. I don't think anybody else does either. So we can measure effort, we can measure engagement, we can measure connection, right? If you look at the analytics that everybody keeps referring to George about, there's a lot of stuff we can tell about what people are doing. You go all the way back to that discussion forum I was talking about at the first, that student who put in 147 sort of posts is actually kind of a bad writer. But you know what? They got an awful lot better after 147 tries. That student got an A in my course, not because they were the best writer in my course, because they worked the hardest. And one of the beauties of these kinds of technologies is that we can measure that effort. But there's a lot of ways to get around that. And if you've ever tried to do that, oh yeah, make sure you make 20 blog posts during the, make sure you just, there's a lot of ways to cheat in that process. And not every contribution is equivalent, right? And sometimes 10 words are better than 10,000. So I'm not saying that it's just effort. Engagement is a different story. How much are you actually participating? How much are you actually trying to work? You know? And then connection. For anybody, has anybody seen Snap? It's George. Snap and a couple of others. Yeah. What Snap does, if you throw it at a discussion forum, for instance, it will tell you how many different people a person is connected to and how many times they've done that. So how many connections are they making during the course of this? And you can step past that and figure out what kinds of connections they're making to contacts, to different pieces of content, to different, how much of the connectivity are they happening? How many new connections have they done during the course of this process? So if we measure those things, instead of trying to measure learning, it allows responsible, because if you want to measure learning, you've got to box things up so you can figure out what they're doing. If we take the gloves off, and we take the constraints off, that allows the student to be responsible for and to measure their own learning, right? We can let the robots count all the stuff they want to and the stuff that they're good at counting. So if we make the community the curriculum, we take all this stuff off, we let people connect, then membership is how we scale. When we invite people to the discussion and we bring them in and they become part of our professional communities, we can invite as many people as we want. Thanks. I'm sorry?
When you're talking about the four domain, complex, complicated, and all, you said that we should concentrate on the complex learning, right? But don't you think to increase
reach for the complex learning
for the education, for educating a kid?
That's the ultimate goal, yeah, is reach for the complex learning.
So don't you think that we need the combination of all four to increase the efficiency of the kid learning?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely. We need all four. Although the chaos one we're going to want to avoid most times.
Yeah.
Some of it's good, but for the most part. But definitely, we need all four. I mean, again, I still want the doctor to give me the aspirin. I still want my knee fixed. But that's not the high end, right? What I'm saying is we need to reach for the top part of it. That's the goal. That's why I teach. I need to do the other stuff. But the reason why is that complex domain.
Right. Thank you.
Cool. Let's actually hit the gentleman in the tie. I'm sort of biased.
Hi, my question is related to the last slide where you said membership is the second last slide. Membership is how we scale it. So what my basic question is to deal with is when you're a member of a community, there are certain skills that you still need. Like in India, the challenge being that the basic skills of contributing to the community, taking the right things out of the community, those are still the basic skills, and that's still a challenge. And how do you think we overcome that, teaching the skills of membership?
I think that's exactly the challenge, and that's part of membership, right? Is that in order to be part of a community, in order to get into any professional community, so if I wanted to talk to Grania about chemistry, she said she was a chemist earlier, I simply can't join that community without picking up the language, and then the process of the simple and complicated teaching becomes a process of giving people the skills they need to be able to be members, right? To be able to have the skills and literacies they need to connect. So if you've never done any connected learning, so you don't understand or you've never experienced the idea of a curriculum developing between people, it's going to be really tough for you to join a MOOC. You can, but in order to be a member, you're going to have to pick those up as you go along. So then you end up needing to structure things for some people in order to be able to get them there. So I agree.
So do you think they should just throw themselves into it and then pick it up, or should there be a structure?
I think it's going to be entirely different for different people. I think that there are some people for whom it's very easy for me to say, throw it into, because that's the way I do everything. But my experience has been that some things I will and some things I won't. So, what's that? I'm running out of time too. Some things I will and some things I won't. With like in my classroom, I'll give you a specific example. My educational technology adult learner classes, I've got students in there who can barely turn on a computer. And I will get them to blog before I explain to them what one is. And I'll just throw them in. Right? Now I create sort of security processes around that to make sure that they don't get themselves into trouble. but I want them starting, and I want to throw them in, because a long description is something you can't contextualize. So in some cases, yes. In other cases, you're going to want to go step by. I know that's not a great answer, but it's just where my experience has led me. So we're going to take one more. I don't want to roll through less this time here. I'm still under 45 minutes left. So we'll just take one last question, and I'll hand it over.
Yeah, I just had a one-line question from the perspective of what you have been asked by the previous two questioners and what you have answered. Keeping in mind the first slide, which she mentioned, and keeping in mind the second slide of education technology for adult learners. My question is that what I understood was you were talking about individual-centric learning strategies to make people learn skills on their own. So I just wanted to know how difficult would it be to manage people of adult learners in a classroom when they all have their own learning methods?
It's hard. It's one of those things where people have to accept that if somebody takes responsibility for the fact that they have a different approach, right, then they're in a situation they have to accept where they are in the learning process. It can't be my problem. It has to be their problem. Not because I'm unwilling to help them, but when they leave my classroom and go back to their workspace, it becomes their problem again. Because there's nowhere else in the world that we go, oh, you don't like listening to things? You'd rather have them in video? Wait, instead of having this meeting, we're going to record it for you and then play it back for you. That's just not the way the world works. So you do what you can to help people and structure them and give them the supports to let them hopefully succeed as a community. Because it's a individual rhizomatic journey, but it's part of a community at the same time. Right? So those things seem to coexist. I don't have a good answer for how that is. And I'm sure that it's something that could be torn apart in some ways. But to me, those two things are always happening at the same time. I don't know how to explain them. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to stop and let the next speaker go up. Thank you very much for your attention, folks. I appreciate it.